Hey, in this video I'm going to walk you through my process for creating this lovely paper cut. I'm creating this piece in response to the prompt Symmetry, which is the second prompt for Mindfultober 2024. You definitely don't need to be doing Mindfultober to follow along though. This is just a really lovely mindful process to enjoy together. So to follow along, you'll need some paper. It doesn't matter if you're using colour paper, white paper, black paper, whatever. I've got a selection here to choose from. I'm going to use this piece of white paper as scrap to kind of plan out my design. So it's great if you have a piece of scrap paper, as well as some paper that you're going to use for cutting. Now, when you are going to be cutting your paper, it's a good idea if your paper is not too thick, because it's just harder to cut if it's too thick. So try and choose paper that's quite thin, like the weight that you'd get for like photocopy paper is great. You're also going to need a pencil, an eraser, some glue, some scissors, and if you have one, a scalpel and cutting mat can be helpful for the more fiddly bits of cutting. If you don't know me, my name is Mel. I'm an artist and educator and a top teacher on Skillshare, where I teach drawing for beginners and mindful art making. If you're interested in those two things, then you're warmly invited to come and join my free Facebook community, where we share lots of ideas, resources, chats, and just hang out with other people that are interested in mindful art making and drawing for beginners. So I have been really enjoying exploring folk-inspired botanical collage recently, and the art of paper cutting, because it's such a lovely, mindful way to create images. It's also just such a really lovely, kind of playful and freeing way to create art, because there's not the permanence that you get when you're kind of working directly onto paper with materials. The process of cutting things out, moving them around, deciding where you want them to go, maybe discarding some or cutting something new, it just allows for so much more freedom and playfulness, and just takes away some of that pressure that can come sometimes with art making. So for that reason, I'd like to interpret the theme of symmetry by creating a folk style botanical. Now, in general, you'll see lots of symmetry in folk art botanicals, so this prompt lends itself really beautifully to creating something like this. I'm going to start by creating a rough sketch of what I would like to aim for with my paper cut. Now, I like to work directly with the paper. What I mean by that is I don't tend to draw out my design first and then cut shapes out. I like to kind of draw with the scissors. I just find the approach more immediate, more fun, more playful, and it just kind of makes my work feel a bit more kind of lively and expressive. So what I like to do if I'm going to work in that way is actually just create a sketch first so that I have a bit of an idea of what I'm aiming for. With most folk art botanicals, I will generally start by thinking about a lollipop shape, so like a circle with a stick. And there are lots of variations on that, but if you start with that, you'll generally end up with something that looks kind of like a botanical. Now, I quite like the idea of having some quite big kind of leaves on this one, so I'm going to kind of think about some sort of a shape like this. I think sort of reminds me of a dandelion leaf. Now, don't worry about your sketch being accurate or symmetrical, it doesn't matter. It's really just to give us some guidance when we start cutting. Now, something else that I add to a lot of my work that is sort of folk inspired are additional embellishments. So very often these will be little dots, or they might be teardrop shapes, lots of parallel lines, just little kind of decorative elements that take it from being something realistic to something that has that kind of folk art style to it. So that's why I'm adding these little kind of dots here. Okay, so I think I am going to go for something kind of based on like a seed pod rather than a flower. I quite like to work with seed pods. It's still pretty symmetrical at the moment. And then I'll sort of break this shape up into other shapes. Put some of those teardrop type shapes in there, and maybe a circle in the middle. Now, we may not be sort of going to completely accurately stick to the design that we have here, but it's helpful just to have something to get us started. And you can kind of start with something a bit simple, and we might kind of make it a bit more intricate and complex as we go. So I'm fairly happy with that as a starting point. I might add some more kind of stuff in the middle, but I quite like the shapes just to get started with. So the way that I'm going to work with this is to use some paper and fold it in half and start by cutting that way. This is why it's also really helpful to use paper that is not too thick, because if it is quite thick paper, you're going to find it quite tricky to do this. Now I'm going to fold mine and then sort of unfold it later and stick it. You may, you know, it doesn't really matter that it's going to have a crease down it. It's more about the process, because I just really love to work in this way, because it's almost like a little surprise what you get at the end. It can feel kind of exciting in that way. So thinking about how to create my symmetrical design, I'm going to fold my sketch, and that's going to help me to understand the shapes that I'm going to be aiming for. So I need to just remind myself that there is a stem, because it's kind of disappeared off there. So I am just going to make a start. So I am expecting that the paper cut version that I'm going to create is going to be a lot more kind of rudimentary than the sketch, because I am, like I said, just drawing with the scissors. I kind of have this plan that I'm working with, but it is, you know, it's much harder to work, I think, from that place, just cutting out shapes with scissors, than sketching it first. But it's one of the mindful aspects, I think, of working in this kind of way, because without that sort of pencil line, we have to really pay attention to what we're doing, and that can be something which, you know, if we draw everything out first and then cut it out later, kind of like making a blueprint and then working with it, you might find that your mind just kind of wanders and switches off a little bit. It's totally normal for that to happen, but I just really enjoy finding kind of ways to keep my mind present with what I'm working on. And yeah, working without a drawing on the paper, I think, is one of those ways, because you have to pay attention. Otherwise, things can very quickly go a little bit wrong. Now, it is going to look a little bit different, I think, to the sketch. I can already tell the proportions are a bit different, but that's okay. We don't have to cut it all in one piece as well. If it starts to get a little bit tricky and we think, actually, I feel like I might enjoy creating it in several pieces, then that's fine. There's no rules here. You don't have to do it the same way as I am. I just think it's kind of fun to try new ways of doing something. So I am more of a fan of scissors on the whole than the scalpel. I just kind of find it more comfy, but you may find that you're the opposite. So whatever works for you is how I would recommend you proceed with this. Okay. So I'm almost at the point now where, oops, almost cut that bit off by accident, where I'm going to open it up in a sec and just see how the shape's looking. Okay. There we go. Okay, so that's the beginning of our paper cut. It's actually looking kind of more accurate than I expected it to, which is kind of fun. So now that I have the main shape, I want to start cutting some details into it, and actually this is where I am going to switch to my scalpel. Even though I prefer mostly cutting with scissors, I want to actually start getting in and cutting out some of the shapes. I mean, it looks really nice as a silhouette as it is, but I think it would be nice to add a little bit more detail on there. So I'll cut it again. Okay, so got the main shapes I'm pretty happy with. Now, what I would like to do with this is to put it onto a different colour so that I can sort of play with some layering. So I need a colour that's going to contrast quite nicely. This deep blue is really nice. Could try, yeah, the orange is a bit too close. Quite like this colour is nice, but I think actually the deep blue is sort of the most contrasting. Okay, so I want to stick down the shape that I have so far so that I can start to play with the details a bit more. There comes a point with paper cutting, I think, where it's so fragile that it becomes quite hard to work with. So there's usually a point where I think, actually, I'm going to need to stick this down to make it a bit more stable before I can sort of get more detailed with it. So I'm just using my sketch to do my gluing on. Oops. Uh-oh. Quite like the simplicity of the design as it is already. You could just leave it kind of fairly simple like this, or you can sort of keep adding a bit more and do a bit more detail. So I have here the piece from the top, so I can start to add these shapes. Quite fiddly to cut the circles in there small enough, so I'm not sure. I'm struggling to even open that up, so I might actually just leave them solid without the circles in, and I might use something else to create the circles. So I think it's really fun to kind of start your paper cut in this way, sort of cutting the whole shape at once. But you don't need to sort of stick with that the whole way through, because as you start getting down to some of these detailed shapes, you'll find that it's too fiddly to do it that way. So I'm quite liking just doing the first part of the shape in that way, and then sort of add some other ways of doing some paper cutting. It's still, I'm still finding that I'm able to stay really present with the art making. I think it's the nature of cutting with scissors. It just kind of forces you to be quite sort of present with what you're doing. So I quite like the position of those, so I'm going to stick them down. And what I think I'm going to do next is actually introduce a second colour onto the red. I might use some of this nice turquoise here just to create some more of the details. So where I've kind of found it difficult to maybe cut some of those details, like the circles in the leaves, I could potentially cut those out of a different colour, or you could use some art materials and draw it on top. That would be a nice way to kind of finish it off. Okay, so I'm going to quite like this turquoisey colour, so I'm going to use them. I quite like to highlight these sort of circles actually, so see if I can cut a sort of smaller one and go inside. So I'm a big fan of using collage and paper cutting in mindful art making, because I feel as though the involvement of, you know, sort of the coordination that has to happen between your sort of hand and eyes, and that level of observation that you need to have when you're cutting out, it's really helpful in just kind of promoting presence. And prompting us to stay present with our art making. I think sometimes you can end up, I mean, I know I certainly can, if you're drawing in a traditional way, you can sort of be drawing for a while and then realise that you've been somewhere else for a while. And what I think is really nice with mindful art making is just the ability that we can just give our minds a bit of a break from all that constant kind of hustle bustle, thinking about all the things that we've got to do and that sort of inner chatter that goes on all the time. Art making is a great way to access that kind of quiet and calm, but we do still have to work at it. I mean, I think all art making is inherently relaxing, but sometimes you can end up still not being completely present with your art making. And I feel as though introducing collage to the situation just really encourages us to sort of keep with what we're doing. Lots of circles at the moment for these leaves. Going to do some circles inside those teardrop shapes. Okay, I'm just going to glue all of those down because there's quite a few, I don't want to lose any. Fiddly. Okay, so I think I'd like to introduce some of this turquoise colour into the middle here. So I'm going to just need to experiment with that shape a little bit to get something which feels kind of right. Maybe it's be a bit bigger. So you can use the bits of paper that you've cut out kind of like a guide to help get the right shapes. So I'll just keep adjusting that shape to try and get it a bit closer to what I'm aiming for, which is it's almost there. I think what I'm aiming for with this collage is nothing, it's not too intricate. I want it to still feel quite sort of simple and spontaneous, which is why I'm not really too worried about, you know, when the shapes aren't kind of perfectly matching up. I think I'm just going to put that sort of shape on there, and then it's kind of almost feeling done, I think. I want to keep it relatively simple. So I'm just cutting these tiny pieces, these sort of rectangles. I quite like to introduce a kind of an element of pattern through the middle section there, that kind of on top the turquoise. So I'm just going to kind of stick them like sort of parallel. Now you'll notice as well, I'm not worrying too much at this point about the symmetry being totally perfect, and that is something which I do really enjoy, the kind of wonkiness that comes with folk art when things are not kind of perfect. So although the design itself has symmetry within it, and we started off with a really symmetrical shape, as I'm kind of adding more elements onto it, it's kind of becoming less symmetrical, and I think that just adds a little bit of personality to it, style. It's a nice way to inject some kind of personality into it, because when things are perfectly symmetrical and everything is kind of very rigid, I feel like it can lose the charm that comes with making art by hand. You know, this is a handmade collage, and I want it to retain that feeling of being handmade. So I don't want there to be perfect symmetry. Okay, so I think that's finished now. I hope you've enjoyed following along and found this a kind of interesting way of approaching collage in a bit of an unusual way, and could kind of relax and enjoy the mindful aspects of this process too. If you're taking part in Mindfultober, then don't forget to photograph or scan your collage and share it over on Instagram with myself and the other hosts. If you're not taking part in Mindfultober, then feel free to still share your work over there. I'd love to see it. I always love seeing your work. If you've enjoyed this video, please do remember to just hit that thumbs up button. It means so much to get your likes and your comments as well underneath. I do check for comments and respond when I can, so it'd be great to hear from you. And don't forget to subscribe to my channel for more videos like this. I hope I'll see you again soon. Bye for now.